This is Unit 9.10, which is Human Impacts on Biodiversity. So we're trying to determine how much influence humans are having on endangerment and extinction of species. And so if you look back at hundreds of millions of years ago, there are 5 major mass extinctions. Now, of course, these are all naturally caused because humans did not exist. But these were due to any number of natural changes in the Earth's climate and ecosystems, and yet catastrophic changes. Again, as I mentioned in an earlier screencast, consider 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth and caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, along with plenty of other species as well. So how much influence are humans having? Well, the background extinction rate is about 1 species per million species per year. But our current extinction rate is more like 0.01 or 0.1, which is actually 1 species per 1,000 species per year. So it's almost 1,000 times the extinction rate that existed historically. So 100 to 1,000 times greater, depending on where you are in the world. So our current extinction event rivals the end Cretaceous, which is the one that killed the dinosaurs. If you look at this graph, different Earth mass extinctions. So the first one, 445 million years ago during the Ordovician, drastic drop in oxygen levels, killed a lot of organisms in the Devonian. During the Permian time, it's possible that there were asteroid impacts, but a lot of intense volcanic activity. 200 million years ago, still in debate as to what caused it, but it could have been volcanic eruptions or asteroids. It's well documented that 66 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth and caused the extinction of dinosaurs. But we are causing extinction at a comparable rate, or a much higher rate, I should say. So there's a move to call this the 6th mass extinction. So as you can see on this graph, we have time on the horizontal scale, and we have 2 different graphs on the vertical scales. Numbers of extinction on the left and population numbers of humans on the right. The number of extinctions tracks pretty well with human population, so it seems likely that these 2 things are connected. So number of species, as we catalog them, goes up, but you'll see that certain species have leveled out. So like birds, we're not discovering any new birds. Other species are going up a little bit, but things are starting to level out. Why is our current estimate of number of extinctions too low? Well, population growth is continuing even as we're taking measurements. So there's always a little delay between what we're measuring and what's actually happening now. So whatever we measure, we're already behind by the time we've measured it and determined those measurements. Climate change is going to increase. So the current estimate of extinctions due to climate change is going to increase also. We don't know the actual number of species. Of course, we know the number of species we've identified, but new species are still being discovered, and so we'll probably never know the actual number of species. So that is probably a reason why there's an undercount for extinction. Like there are species that we've never identified and that are going extinct. Rates are very high in centers of biodiversity, maybe not surprisingly because there's so many different species there. So if there are any changes in the habitat or the environment, then the number of species tends to drop pretty rapidly in those places. Potential habitats for new species, right? Are there new species being created? Not as commonly, because a lot of habitats are degraded or fragmented. And so not only are we losing species that exist, but then new species are also not being created. So if you go back to one of the earlier screencasts, do you remember the anthropogenic causes of endangerment of species, right? We had the acronym HIPCO. So maybe take a moment to pause the video, check your notes, and write down what those anthropogenic causes are. Here we go. Habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, population, climate change, overexploitation. So if you look at the number of species and the reason that they are threatened or not threatened, so much of it is habitat loss, followed by pollution. These are, of course, attributed to human growth, human population growth. So people are needing space to do their thing. They're destroying habitats for animals. And then people's lifestyles creates pollution, whether you're in a first world or third world country. And that is hurting species also, reducing the amount of biodiversity. So take a moment to read the statement from the National Academy of Sciences. Tries to put into context what is going on right now and why it's important to maintain number of species we have. Consider the Great Barrier Reef, which was healthy, or parts of it were healthy as recently as 2014. But then as there's coral bleaching and then coral dying, many parts of the Great Barrier Reef just don't look the same anymore. We said habitat loss is a major threat to biodiversity, especially to birds, then also reptiles and mammals. Fish don't suffer as much habitat loss since they're in the water, but it does affect them. But fish are pretty easily exploited, so that tends to affect reduce their biodiversity. Consider this example. In Indiana, wetlands, which make important habitat for different animals, historically had 5.6 million acres, but that has been reduced to 813,000 acres, really less than 20% of its original surface area. This is a rather famous photo of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And if you know something about the history of these two countries, then you might know that it's the Dominican Republic on the left side and Haiti on the right side, where various government policies over time have resulted in Haiti being overexploited and the Dominican Republic maintaining some of its original flora and fauna. And of course, just leaving it alone isn't enough. Humans would have to go in and make major changes to this landscape in order for it to recover to what it would have been if there hadn't been any intervention by humans. Habitats can become fragmented. This reduces biodiversity and is caused by humans. And so a lot of these housing developments, it looks great that there's lots of trees in between the houses, and yet the habitat that's created there is not nearly as good as if it were just compact and not spread out like the way it is. There's really no need to make those houses spread out in that way. It would be better if the houses were built more compactly. So causes of fragmentation: roads and pipelines tend to cut off different habitats. Clearing for housing or agriculture will fragment habitats. And of course, logging just fragments habitats that way. Climate change is also impacting habitat loss. So temperature, precipitation changes are causing species to be outside their ranges of tolerance. Sea level rise is happening. So things like polar habitat is being lost to sea level rise. Coastal habitat is lost to sea level rise. It's possible this could generate new shallow ocean habitat, but the ocean habitat that's being gained doesn't really compensate for the terrestrial habitat that's being lost. Declines in genetic diversity is another effect of humans on biodiversity. So fewer types of wild species. The less wild species there are, the less chance that there is going to be some mutation in a species that allows it to adapt to environmental change in the future. The more that humans do agriculture, the fewer species there are, because humans don't raise lots of different species. They tend to raise a very small number of species that are easy to manage and maintain. Interbreeding, you can see this again in agriculture, where preferable traits are bred by humans, but this reduces genetic diversity, possibly increases the number of harmful traits that exist. You consider different dog breeds, where humans breed dogs for specific characteristics, and then some undesirable characteristics are bred as well. So cheetahs had population bottlenecks twice in their evolutionary history, where certain individuals survived but other individuals did not, resulting in reproductive difficulties. Cheetahs tend to be susceptible to viruses because of their lowered genetic diversity within their populations. We can see there's different subspecies of cheetahs, but their habitats have shrunk pretty significantly from what they originally were. Please remember, for population bottlenecks, you might start at the top with lots of different genetic diversity, but when something happens that reduces the population size, certain characteristics are eliminated from the population, and the population becomes less genetically diverse, even if its population size recovers to what it originally was. Florida panthers have had this issue. Females were translocated from Texas to Florida to try to help the genetic diversity within the population. And it seems to have worked. Population has grown 3 times. And then parent fitness and survivability has increased greatly due to increased genetic variation. So this is a nice little infogram that talks more about the fitness of the Florida panther. And more graphs about this also. So let's talk about domesticated species, because this is an example of human impact on biodiversity. So most livestock species in the world include a specific 7 mammals and 4 birds. Some of these you might know, things like donkeys, bison, goats, horses, cows, sheep, pigs, maybe not that pig specifically. And of course, chickens, ducks, geese, and turkeys. But the genetic diversity declines because we concentrate on the most productive varieties of livestock and crops. And so even though in the past there have been lots of different types of, let's say, chickens or cows or ducks, we reproduce the ones that are the most productive for humans. So plant genetic diversity has gone down because we concentrate primarily on higher yields of plants. But the problem is this leaves our food sources vulnerable to biotic or abiotic changes. A good example of this was the corn blight in the 1970s. You can see the example of this below, where this fungus would get into the corn, cause these kernels to be like blue and misshapen and basically inedible. This fungus killed half of the corn crops in the 1970s because there was not enough genetic diversity, and the corn was susceptible to this fungus. So you can read a little bit more about the corn blight problem on this slide if you want to. Pause the video and take a look. There's also a video about the doomsday seed vault, where humans have preserved lots of seeds of different plants, some of which have gone extinct or that are in danger of going extinct in case there's some major catastrophic event, which, as we said earlier, is happening. So here's a fun infographic of the seed bank. So you can pause this video and check it out if you want. So this major extinction event that we're talking about is the last 2 million years, which is about how long humans have been around in some fashion. And 75% of all species go extinct within that period. So this graph shows kind of a red list index. So what this is a artificial index number that shows how likely animals are to go extinct. So species that are least concerned have RLIs of 1, but then 0 is species that have gone extinct. And you can see here how a lot of animals and plants have declined over time, but how corals have become very endangered, really just in the last 25 years as compared to other animals. So how are we going to mitigate loss of biodiversity? We create protected areas such as wildlife preserves. We create habitat corridors. So like I mentioned, this is an overpass that allows animals to cross between different habitats. And it's better to have this than to have nothing. We can promote sustainable land use practices. So this allows farmers to grow lots of different crops, not just focus on one crop. And so we can have greater biodiversity among crops. Finally, we can restore lost habitat, and this requires a fair amount of human labor, but it can be done to restore habitat that was destroyed by previous populations of humans. All right, well, that is Unit 9.10. Please let me know if you have any questions.